BMW expects this, the all-new X3M, to be its best-selling performance car going forward. Alongside its brother, the X4M, these two cars are going to be a huge deal for the German performance brand. They're going to take on the AMG GLC 63, and that's a big task. It's probably why this car also debuts the M brand's all-new engine. As you can see, this is a much tougher looking X3. You got all these black highlights here, which you get with the competition pack, which is going to be standard in our market. We don't actually get the standard X3M. And if you walk around here, I really do love these 21-inch wheels, but more so these huge 19-inch brakes, which are actually taken from the 760i BMW limo. So it goes to show you just how much braking power there is. And if you follow me to the rear, I am a big fan of the back of this car. I really love these taillights, and more particularly the sort of black highlights you see down here with the quad exhaust. So it's a very good looking car. And if we open the boot, this may be an M car, but it's still got all the practicality of a normal X3. There is a lot to like inside this car. I'm a particular fan of the color scheme you can see on these seats here. And speaking of which, actually, these are brand new seats from BMW, and I tried them in the X4M and they weren't awfully comfortable, but for some reason in the X3M, they seem to be pretty good. The rear, not so much. It's not as comfortable as I would have hoped, but in general, it's quite a nice interior. Now, you may be able to see, this has got some highlights from the M5. So you've got the red starter button, plus the red M1 and M2 buttons. The things I don't really like about this car in particular is the fact that they're using the old iDrive system. So it's not the iDrive 7, the one we're used to from the X5 and the X7. It's still using the older system. It's not bad, it's just that it's not the latest, and I think for a brand new car, that would have been an expectation, certainly from me. Otherwise though, it kind of does everything you want, and everything sort of pointed towards the driver, so it's quite a nice place to sit. And given the type of car that it is, the bolstering in these seats is actually quite nice. I can adjust them, so there's a lot of things here that you can move around and you can change to suit your liking. So I'm really keen to go out for a drive though. So first of all, this new engine, which BMW calls the S58, is a brand new 3-litre 6-cylinder inline engine. It's a twin turbo system, so it's got 375 kilowatts of power and 600 newton meters of torque. It's actually the most powerful Series M engine in a 6-cylinder that the brand has ever made. And it's also going to go into the new M3, M4 next year. So there's a lot riding on the success of this engine. And what I can tell you is that having gone from that dual clutch transmission into a normal 8-speed unit has made a humongous amount of difference. Like, it's so much more smoother to drive at low speed. You can tell as I'm driving around now, like when it shifts gears, there's no jerkiness to it, there's no suddenness to it. It's just smooth, it's just comfortable. That's the good things about the car, that's the good things about the engine. I'm pretty impressed with the torque delivery. I'm pretty impressed about the way it works. Have a listen to the engine. Not a bad sound, is it? It's pretty enhanced, as in it's fake, but as far as fake engine sounds go, it's a pretty good one. So that aside, the ride in this car is quite stiff. That's probably the kindest way I can put it. And I'm in comfort mode at the moment, and I can definitely feel every little bump. If I put it into Sport transmission or Sport Plus transmission, it really starts sort of bouncing around. Now, the argument for that is that being an M car, it's meant to be the sort of car that you could take onto a racetrack, which is actually where we are. We're at Monticello racetrack here in New York, and I've had a number of laps out on the track today. And before I went out, they told me that this car should give you the same feeling as an M3, and it really doesn't. I mean, it's just a heavier car. It's nearly 2 tons, and you're just not going to get the same feeling from this as you would from a dedicated M3 car that's just so at home on a racetrack. In saying that though, given its weight, it actually behaved relatively well. You know, it cornered quite nicely. It had nice power out of the bends. It did have a bit of understeer, and certainly if you put it into what this car calls xDrive Sport, it gets really tail happy. The back of the car seems to come loose a fair bit, and if that doesn't happen, if you turn that mode off and you're just driving it in sort of everything in Sport Plus, then it starts to understeer a fair bit. So it's quite hard to beat the laws of physics when you've got a heavy car trying to go around the racetrack. So I certainly would not recommend taking your BMW X3 or X4M on a racetrack. It's also worth noting that there are a lot of personalization options in this car, which is very typical of BMW M. So you got these 3 buttons down here. You got the engine, you got the suspension, you got the steering. So you could obviously adjust those as you wish. Plus you've got the exhaust button for the noise. So it's actually quite funny because the steering should never come out of comfort. The comfort mode in the X3M for steering is the equivalent of Super Sport Plus in any other car I've ever driven. It's so heavy as it is that when I put it into Sport Plus, which I'll do now, it's genuinely hard to turn. It's like a gym workout. And even when we went on the racetrack, the instructors told us not to do that because it becomes a bit of a difficult thing to drive, but I still did it just to see what they meant. And yeah, it was quite difficult to drive. So something of note there. And also the lane departure systems in this car and all the other active safety systems are quite intrusive, I have to say. They really do force you back into your lane rather than sort of guide you or recommend you get back into your lane. There's a lot of intrusion going on there. Thankfully you can turn them off, which is a huge bonus. And speaking of technology, I know I said before that this doesn't have the latest version of iDrive, and that is disappointing. Something else I didn't point out is that CarPlay is also an option on this car, and I think BMW remains the only manufacturer in the world to offer CarPlay as an option. And it's not just an option once. You pay for it for I think 2 or 3 years, and then you pay for it again. So a bit odd if you ask me. Otherwise though, the actual iDrive system, even though this is the old one, is still pretty good. Like, you can get a lot out of it. So this particular BMW X3 costs about $157,000 and it'll be in Australia around August this year. If you want the X4M, that's an extra couple of grand. It's really not my pick because it's just as fast, 4.1 to 100, and it weighs about the same, and you just lose practicality, and it doesn't particularly look any better, if not worse. So the X3M though is a great car. It really is a great car. It's a super SUV. And it's BMW's first attempt at it in this segment, and I think they've done a pretty good job. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what it's like when it goes home to Australia, because taking on the GLC 63, as I said, is quite a tough ask. But I reckon BMW may have just done it.